Hello, welcome everybody to today's Bay Nature Ask the Naturalist with David Wimpfheimer. It's really exciting to see you all here, and I'm really excited for today's event. So before we begin, I would like to invite everyone to please turn their cameras on if they're able. It would be great to see you all and to be together for this hour at lunchtime. And yeah, if you're able and in a place where you can turn your camera on, please do. It would be great to see you. Also, I'd like to introduce Bay Nature Magazine to those of you who may not know. Bay Nature Magazine is a quarterly print magazine that is based in Berkeley, California, and we cover local nature and conservation topics here in the Bay Area. And in addition to our editorial content, we also have digital pieces that get published weekly on our website, in addition to the magazine. And we're also starting up an event program that aims to bring these published pieces to life through in-person hikes as well as online talks and events like this one. So thank you all so much for being here and for your support of this event, and it's really great to see you. So this is our Ask the Naturalist series, which is really featuring expert naturalists in particular fields and is an opportunity for all of you attendees to ask your questions about the topic that we're focusing on. And today we're going to be looking at birding. And our expert today, who I'd like to introduce, is David Wimpfheimer. So I'd like to invite David Wimpfheimer on screen now and welcome him on stage. So David is a professional naturalist, guide, and biologist who is very passionate about our natural world. And David has studied seabirds and shorebirds in Alaska, raptors in Egypt, and a variety of birds and point rays in other regions of California. Since the mid-1980s, David has shared his knowledge about all aspects of the natural world with hundreds of groups, and his educational programs have focused on point rays, Alaska, Arizona, Baja California, Yosemite, Death Valley, and other parts of California. For more than 35 years, he has worked for many organizations, including the Smithsonian Institute, Cal Academy, Point Reyes Field Station, and many others. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today, and it's great to see you, and thank you for joining for our Ask the Naturalist. So we'll begin with David will share a brief talk about the birding basics for beginners. And after that brief talk, and during, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And after David's talk, I will be calling on those of you who have entered questions into the chat and inviting you to unmute and ask your questions. Or if you'd rather, I can also ask them for you. Just let me know. But please don't hold back. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we will get to you as we go. So yeah, without further ado, thank you so much, David, for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I assume the volume is okay, Leah?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay. Well, it's great to see a fair number of familiar names and faces. So welcome to all of you on this beautiful, warm fall day. I'm actually speaking to you from the town of Lee Vining, right by the shores of beautiful Mono Lake, where I've been fortunate to have been the last few days. But I suppose that gets into just a point that for me, birding is fun, and you can do it really anywhere we happen to be. And you can put different attitudes or values into it. So, for instance, I have some friends that this year they're spending a lot of time, energy, and yes, money as well into traveling to different parts of North America, whether it's Texas or Florida or Alaska or Newfoundland, trying to see as many birds as possible. So for them, it's kind of almost a competitive thing, and that's not for everybody, clearly. Some other people will get a lot of enjoyment just out of seeing a beautiful scrub jay in their backyard, or blessed to have California quail, another incredibly wonderful bird that we can see fairly easily. So when I started looking at birds back in the early 1970s, that was something that appealed to me, that there are very few rules. You don't need much to do it. Pretty much just a pair of binoculars, which I can talk about in a little bit, and a field guide, something to help you figure out what you're actually looking at. So as far as binoculars in the olden days, I'm saying back in the 70s, maybe you had your really expensive binoculars for about $1,000, and then there really wasn't much else until you got down to your $59 binoculars at Sears Roebuck. Now there's a lot of good options, and even for about $200, one can get quite good binoculars. So obviously you would want to look at all those different um, things as far as costs. Here's some binoculars that are fairly expensive and a little bit on the heavy side. So just because they work for me doesn't mean that they're going to work for everybody else. And a good place to get a feeling for different binoculars would be by going on an Audubon Society field trip. I guess we don't necessarily call them all Audubon Society anymore these days. And that's a whole nother issue that we don't necessarily have to touch on, but Golden Gate Alliance, for instance, or Marin Audubon Society, and those offer great opportunities for field trips. So while you're learning about birds, you can certainly do it on your own, but if you're out there with a group, that's going to increase your learning curve quite a bit. So I encourage folks to be active and take advantage of tremendous resources that we have here in the Bay Area. Um, so in addition to binoculars, having a field guide to help you figure out what you're actually looking at is going to be very helpful. A field guide, or now there's a lot of apps. Here's a field guide from National Geographic versus here's an old one that I don't necessarily recommend that has a lot of photographs, but again, there's going to be a lot of options for you. And simply on your phone, which most of us have, sorry, would be an app which would show you the bird and something about it, where it's found. Here's a range map. So for me, again, having grown up in the 60s and 70s, I'm more book focused. And I think with a book, you can do things. So in the Bay Area, we have a small bird that has a black throat or bib. And you said, well, I think that's a chickadee, but I'm not sure which chickadee it is. So you can look very quickly in the field guide, taking a look at these range maps and getting a feeling for whether this is a species that would occur here in the Bay Area, like the chestnut-backed chickadee here, versus you think, well, that looks a lot like the mountain chickadee. You would then see that the mountain chickadee doesn't occur in the Bay Area. So there's a lot of resources, different field guides, the apps, whether it's, I use one called the iBird, there's one by Sibley or Peterson, and I believe all you folks are going to be sent a link to a PDF that I put together, or it's in the chat, which would list these various different resources. But using binoculars, because I know I, for instance, was just out with somebody more of a beginner yesterday, and they're, if you're looking at something like a hawk sitting on a post or a duck out in the middle of a pond, that might be fairly easy to see using your binoculars. But if you're looking at for a small 6-inch greenish bird and it's moving through the branches and leaves with green leaves, that's going to be a whole lot harder to locate. So what I always encourage people, to beginners particularly, to do is to actually see the bird without using your binoculars. Look up in that oak tree, really try to see where the bird is. If the leader says it's out on the 3 o'clock side of the tree, we're mostly old timers. We remember when we had hands and a clock, and where 3 o'clock is out on the outer right side. Ideally, find the bird, keep looking at the bird, and then bring those binoculars up to your eyes, and hopefully your eyes are still focused in that spot where the bird is. Sometimes people have the tendency to see the bird and then look down at their binoculars and then pull them up to their eyes, and they've really lost contact with where that bird actually is. But again, don't be frustrated if you are a beginner, because that can take some practice actually using binoculars. And there's different sizes of binoculars, an 8x42 or 10x42. That first number is the magnification. So certainly if you have a larger number, that's going to increase the size of the image that you're seeing, which could be good if you're looking at something far away. But what it also typically means is you're going to have a narrower field of view. So it might be a little bit harder to find that particular bird. So for people that spend a lot of time looking at birds and trees, then you may be better off with that smaller size 8x42 versus if you're out in the open a lot on the beach or out in the shores, then that bigger power might work perfectly fine for you. Um, so identifying birds, I think even beginners already know a certain number of birds. Folks know what a crow is, what a woodpecker, what a duck is, what a robin is. So if you're seeing something that you're not sure about, then I would encourage you to do comparison. You know, is that something like a woodpecker or is it something like a duck? But maybe it's a little bit different. Well, then as a beginner, we're just going to have to learn certain terms like what a grebe is. A grebe is going to look like a duck, but it's a little bit different, and that's all going to be in the learning curve. Maybe that bird looks like a robin, the way it's hopping around on the ground, but it's a little smaller and it's not orange covered. What type of bird is a robin? Well, it's in the thrush family. So maybe that's a thrush, perhaps a hermit thrush, which can be moderately common in people's backyards and parks throughout the fall and winter. So certainly comparison and learning those different groups. How is something similar? How is something different? And again, if you're all alone, actually, when I did start birding, I was spending a fair amount of time alone. So I was learning the distinctive birds, maybe back east in Wisconsin, something like a scarlet tanager, a bright red bird, or Wilson's warbler, a yellow bird with a black cap. But it was a slow process, and I would have been much better served going out with a local group. As here in the Bay Area, we have, as I mentioned, tremendous resources with all the different birding Audubon groups or Golden Gate Alliance or the different museum groups all have different options. And then I also encourage anybody really to find a favorite park or area that you're going to, ideally very often, at least once a month, ideally once a week, and then simply writing down what birds you're seeing on that one visit. And that way you'll have a permanent record and you'll be learning the birds much more quickly that way. What birds are common that you're seeing every time, perhaps a scrub jay or a quail. What birds are just there in the wintertime, which ones are around in migration or in the breeding season. You can do that simply by just writing down on a plain old notebook, or now we have apps that could do something like that for you. And then I mean, there's so many places in the Bay Area. We're totally blessed with an incredible diversity. I live in Marin County, out right near Point Reyes National Seashore. But whether you live in the city, Golden Gate Park, or down the peninsula, Palo Alto Baylands, or the East Bay, Lake Merritt, Tilden, we could go on and on, spend the whole hour just talking about different sites. I'll mention, and it's on your handout, there's a worldwide data gathering website or facility called eBird. And one of eBird's big features is having what are called hot spots. So Stowe Lake and Golden Gate Park would be a hot spot. Lake Merritt would be a hot spot. And Point Reyes has numerous hot spots like Limentor Beach or Abbott's Lagoon. But by looking at that hot spot, you can see what birders have put down, perhaps just recently, the previous day. And that's going to give you a very good idea of what to look for when you're visiting that site. If you start completely cold, then again, that's going to be a harder process. So maybe I'm going to leave it at that, Leah, and we could probably open it up to questions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful and such a great overview. Yeah, everyone who is listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And as soon as I see them, I'll be calling on you to ask your questions. But in the meanwhile, I have some questions that I'll be asking. One of my first questions, David, is that you had mentioned that you use books like field guides. And I was wondering, do you find yourself using those field guides when you are in action while birding, or are you more often like studying them for future reference? And like, do you find yourself using them more out in the field or more at home for your own reference and research?
I think the answer is yes to both of those things, but
Okay.
and that's something that I did write down. So thank you for reminding me. Really get to know that field guide well. So I know when I was learning birds just in a spare moment, I'd sit and just fan through that field guide
Hmm.
so that, here's, we know what a sparrow is necessarily, but there are dozens of different kinds of sparrows, or, there's so many different kinds of wrens. So
Hmm.
that way, when you actually see something, hopefully in your mind, you've already got an image. Hey, I think I did see that woodpecker somewhere. Most woodpeckers are black and white, but this one has a really distinctive big red head. So maybe it's this one, the red-headed woodpecker. Ideally, when you're in the field, I would encourage folks really to get a good view of what they're looking at.
Hmm.
I think I had on one of my handouts that the book will not fly away, but the bird might. So
Uh,
really focus on getting a good feeling for it, whether it has red on the top of its head, or if it's got a short bill, if it's got a squat bill, which might make it a sparrow, or if it's got more of a long pointy bill, which could make it a warbler. So those are all things that you could then reference once again you're going back to look at that field guide.
hmm. Gotcha. Thank you. That's really helpful. It looks like we have some questions in the chat, so I'll start. Um, it looks like our first question. Oh, there's a note about from Peter. Peter was saying that there's a difference between 8 by 42 and 10 by 42. Um, Peter, do you want to unmute and comment?
Sure. Hi, David.
Sure.
I'm the beginner that he was maybe referencing yesterday. Um, um, so I got an opinion from someone else about who said 8 by 42 is better for beginners because it's not as unstable, perhaps. I don't know if that's the right word, as 10 by 42s. And just thought you could share with the group kind of your opinion and advantages and disadvantages of those two sizes, which you
Yeah.
recommended in your handout as the two common sizes.
Yeah. No, I recommend whatever people are comfortable with. And again, ideally, if you're on a field trip with maybe 10 people, there might be 10 different kinds of binoculars that you could then hold and compare. If you go to a camera store, maybe they have, although sometimes now the selection is better than it had been in the past. 8 by 42s do offer some advantage in that they're going to have a wider field of view. I have a slight tremor actually. So if you have 10 power, that's going to magnify any shake in your hand versus if you're just magnifying that image only 8 times. Uh, has a wider fit. Sometimes they might be a little bit lighter, but not always. But certainly having that wider field of view, it can make things a little bit brighter. So certainly one thing you want to look at in binoculars is the ratio of those two numbers. 8 by 48 is the power that it's magnified. So that's roughly 5, that ratio. Some people I see on walks or classes have small binoculars, which are great. They're lightweight if you're hiking or bike riding, but it might be like an 8 by 21 or 23. Those will not give you as bright an image. If you're looking at a kestrel sitting out on a post in the bright sunshine, okay, that's great. But if it's an overcast day and you're looking in the shade of a bush and you're trying to see if that bird has streaks on it or if it has spots or something else, then you're going to be at a disadvantage with those smaller binoculars, which we're not going to give you as bright an image. Um, so yeah, I think either one, 8 by 42 or 10 by 42 can work perfectly fine for anybody, but the eights do offer some advantages.
Thanks. But we
Gotcha.
got follow up. If we kind of do it just a follow up in terms of just like a $300 pair of binoculars versus an 800. What is what are you
It's
going to
again,
notice?
and now the binoculars in the $200 to $300 range comparing very favorably with those costing several times an amount. There might be the really slight differences in sharpness. So again, a lot depends. This is going to be, I tell folks, an investment that hopefully you'll be using for a long time for the rest of your life. So yeah, if you can afford something that's a lot more expensive, great. And again, if you think you're going to be using binoculars very often, several times a week, then it might be great to go with those more expensive ones. If it's only going to be once a month or less often, then, just go with the less expensive ones, I would say. And of course, you can be using your binoculars for looking at stars at night. You're on a hike and you see some wildflowers across the stream. Go check them out with the binoculars, or maybe you see that bear on the other side of the valley. We don't want to get too close to it, but can use those binoculars.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, and I've actually used them at concerts too if I'm sitting
Oh, well, certainly.
Yeah, that's helpful too. Our next question is from Arlen. Arlen, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, there we go. Um, Quite a few years ago, someone gave me a very tiny monocular, which was, I could put it in my pocket when I went for a walk. I now use a larger one, but I'm just wondering, what do you think about using a monocular as opposed to
Yeah,
binoculars?
I don't, and unless people really prefer using that binocular, have a problem with one eye, for instance, I always recommend that people use binoculars rather than a monocular. You're going to get a sharper image. Even the
Yeah.
most least expensive pair of binoculars are going to give you a better image than a good monocular. So unless there's really some, and also I think just the thing of holding on to a pair
Well,
of binoculars with two hands and holding them against your glasses, your forehead. If you don't wear glasses, that's going to give you a more stable image than just trying to hold that binocular against one eye. So yeah, I'd encourage you really to try out and get more comfortable using the binoculars.
it's interesting because I find it easier to use one hand and focus it, that way. And as you can tell, I wear glasses, so I would have sunglasses on prescription. Um, Maybe it's just what I've gotten used to. I don't know. But
Obviously,
I
that's a
think
big
the
part of
image,
it. If you're used
well,
to using the binocular and those work fine for you, then I should probably just keep my
well,
closed and
well, no, I want to know if I'm really, I guess the thing to do is to try it out.
yeah, again,
I have some binoculars somewhere.
comparison, if you're out with a group, you
Yeah.
could try somebody's binoculars and again,
Mhm.
see if those offer any advantage to you. Thanks for asking that
Okay,
question.
thank you. Yes, good, thanks.
Awesome. Our next question is from Karen, and Karen has a couple of questions. Karen, would you like to unmute and ask? And everyone else in the group, please feel free to continue entering your questions. We're going to continue making our way down the chat. But Karen, yeah, please unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi David, nice to see you. Most of my books are old and there's name changes over the years. So my first question is, are you aware of any name changes that are coming up in the near future?
Name changes of birds, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, again, you had to ask that question. So, now there is a plan from the American Ornithologists Union to change names of any birds that are named after a person, and that's sort of stemming from the whole idea that individuals who did heinous acts like having slaves, we should not use their names. So Audubon had slaves, so we wanted, there's a movement to change the name of the Audubon's shearwater, let's say, or there's maybe 100 different species of birds that are named for people. I'm not necessarily in favor of that those name changes, but if it happens, then birds are going to be given new names instead of the Wilson's warbler, named after Alexander Wilson, who was a contemporary of Audubon. I'm not aware that he did anything particularly bad. I don't think the Jefferson Memorial is having its name changed necessarily, but again, that's a controversial subject that we don't have to dwell on in too length. But it is quite possible that at some point in the future there will be these name changes for birds, and that will necessitate having an updated field guide. But right now, the various field guides that we've been using, whether it's National Geographic or Peterson or Sibley, or if we use an app, those would all be fine. Yeah.
Thanks. I wasn't sure if anything was coming up soon. My second question is, you are in one of my favorite places in the state, and I'm curious what highlights you've had today in terms of
Uh,
songbirds.
Yesterday, I was walking around South Tufa area, and we're into fall. Obviously, it's cold. Chill can be chilly at night here. There was a sage thrasher poking around, eating some brine flies. But as long as he asked me about special birds, and that is something, for beginners, it's something because you're never sure when something magical might enter our lives. And my wife and I were driving through Yosemite National Park in an area where I've been fortunate enough to see a very special large owl only a few times over the last 40 years, roughly. But out of the corner of my eye, when we were driving in this area, I did see this large bird flying behind me. Sometimes it helps to have eyes in the back of your head. But to make the long story short, we were able to get really good views of a great gray owl, which I've spent literally hours walking around some of those same meadows and not seen that bird. So, again, we were incredibly lucky and fortunate. And one of my mentors for years, his name was Rich Dahlkup, and his nickname was Mr. Magic, because it seemed that he would find these uncommon to rare birds that nobody else was seeing or finding. And we said, well, you're lucky, Rich. Well, I'm sure most of us might know people that we think are lucky, but those are always more than often than not, those are people that have studied things a lot, and they put a lot of homework into knowing weather patterns and distribution and seasonal patterns. And it's going to make a difference if you're going out to the Point Reyes Lighthouse, hoping to see maybe an unusual, vagrant small bird, and what the weather patterns have been for the last 24 hours or so. So definitely doing your homework. Yeah, and he also said, I had another phrase, expect the unexpected. So that might sound a little bit odd, but we're mostly have a good idea, some of us, about what we're going to see. If we go to Lake Merritt, there's going to be some ducks there, but probably not necessarily woodpeckers because they're going to be in the trees behind us. But you never know. Maybe something like a peregrine falcon is going to come flying in and grab one of those ducks in front of us. So yeah, just be open to the possibility. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen, for your question. And our next question is from John. John, would you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So as somebody who spends a fair amount of time outdoors but hasn't been particularly a birder, I'm kind of curious, like when you see a bird, what are you looking for first? What are you noticing about the bird that helps you both identify it and appreciate it? Whether it's the color, the shape, the way it moves, where it is. What are you looking for as somebody who's done a lot of birding uh, to get something out of it?
Well, thanks for asking. That's a great question, and I think you almost started answering yourself. We'd be looking for color. We don't have too many red birds in the Bay Area. I was fortunate enough to go to Costa Rica in the early part of this year. There's more bright red birds down there than are here. So if it's we don't have that many bluebirds in the area. We have scrub jays and bluebirds, and after that we don't really have too many other birds. So certainly noting the color, the shape. If it's small, the shape of the bill is going to be really helpful. As I mentioned before, if it has somewhat of a conical, thick shaped bill, there's a good chance it might be a sparrow or a bird that has a large bill. It's a gross beak, literally, versus a bird that has more of a thinner, somewhat tweezer-shaped bill. Could be something like a warbler or a wren. And then what habitat you're in. If you're in the middle of the forest, we're going to have different birds than when you're on the edge of a brushy area or certainly a marsh. So those are just all things that after a while are going to be second nature to anybody who's starting out. Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thanks, John. And everyone in the chat, please continue to ask your questions. In the meanwhile, I have another one to ask. David, you had mentioned when you first started birding, you did a lot of birding by yourself, and that you said you had wished that when you were at that stage, you were birding with others at the same time. Can you elaborate on that a bit? And for people who are beginning birding now, what are some groups that they could hear about or ways that they can find other people to bird with?
Sure. I was going out and again, I wasn't learning necessarily because I was by myself. Maybe I was on a bike ride and I might see a distant hawk, but I didn't really know what kind of hawk or how to get a better view of that. Or maybe I was taking a walk on the edge of some trees and I saw a small yellow bird, but it was only after quite a while that said, okay, what's distinctive about that yellow bird? Well, it has a black cap, and I found through my field guide and finally got to this one that I was going to school in Wisconsin. And okay, well, this bird has it's yellow with a black cap. And hey, it's actually supposed to be here in Wisconsin. So that helped me through it. If I was going out with a group of folks, they could really quickly help me sort of focus into what group of birds I was looking at. If I was in a wetland, well, that looks like a duck, but it's not really a duck. It's got long legs. Well, that's a special bird. That's a rail, for instance. What makes it a rail? Whereas if I wasn't with that group, I might think, well, maybe that's a big sandpiper or something. And they would know seasonality. Of course, different times of the year, we're going to be seeing different species. In the Bay Area, we're blessed with pretty temperate conditions. So we're seeing a good variety of birds almost any day of the year, but there are going to be certain things. We're going to see a greater variety of ducks and waterfowl in the fall and winter months than we would in the summer. And if you go to some of the Central Valley refuges or in the deltas somewhere, as I would encourage people to do, the display of snow geese or sandhill cranes is incredible. But if you do that in July or August, you're not going to get to see those birds because there's a seasonality to all that. So again, going out with groups, and certainly if you're with a group or maybe just have some friends that you're with, having several more pairs of eyes are going to be really helpful as far as seeing what's around rather than just you alone. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any like email lists or any places that people who are interested in birding can meet up or yeah, any of those meeting spaces?
Yeah, certainly I'd encourage the different, either they're called Audubon, like Marin Audubon Society, Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, in San Jose, Palo Alto, San Mateo. Golden Gate Alliance covers the city and the East Bay areas. Again, we're blessed. Any Santa Cruz all the way down there. There are smaller groups. I don't have them right off the top of my head. I know in Santa Cruz, there's actually a Santa Cruz Birding Club. I'm sure there are meetups where there would be people focused on that. But certainly, once you've gone out with one of these more established groups, then by forming friendship, you could then probably go out on a less formal basis with one or two people that you've met. I know in Marin County, Point Reyes, there's Point Reyes Field Institute, there's Marin Open Space District that has walks, East Bay Regional Parks down on the peninsula. I could probably keep going on and on. We're just really, really blessed with having a lot of different opportunities. I've listed most of those in the handout, the PDF that is on the chat or will be sent out to folks. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so
I'll
much.
just say national parks,
Mm.
state parks, county parks. One thing I think I also had down is that each of these parks, the bigger parks will have a bird checklist. So at Point Reyes National Seashore, there's a checklist. If you go to, I'm pretty sure if you go to Tilden Park, there's a checklist. And those are really helpful. That was something that was helpful for me when I was getting started in that. Again, I'm just using the example of a chickadee, which is the chestnut chickadee, moderately common bird in the San Francisco area. But if you go to Yosemite National Park, then you start to get into a different species of chickadee. And the mountain chickadee there is more common than the chestnut-back chickadee once you get to a higher elevation. And that would be marked as seasonal occurrence, typically 4 seasons, and then whether something is common, uncommon, or rare. So that's going to be, again, really a helpful aid or guide if you go to, as I encourage people to do, to expand your horizons. It's great just to go to your local areas, but it's going to be really fun to, again, I've used that example of going to some of the Central Valley marshes and in the fall after mid-November into the winter to see a marsh of 1,000 or 5 or 10,000 snow geese, and then they fly up in the air as a bald eagle flies in front of you. It's pretty amazing, it's pretty wonderful to have those kind of spectacles that are not too far from us. Let's go all the way to the Central Valley. We've got all kinds of incredible shorebird places around San Francisco Bay. But again, having some idea of what to expect, what birds are going to be common in those different habitats, whether something's going to be common throughout the whole year or more just in certain times of the year.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Looks like we have a question from Scott. Scott, do you mind unmuting and asking your question? I can also ask it. Let's see. Scott was wondering, are there any general hints to help discern male versus female and juvenile versus adult?
Yes. In a lot of birds, certainly not all birds, males are going to be more colorful than females, but that's not always the case. We have a lot of people have the California scrub jay where they live, close to where they live. The sexes are the same there. With ducks, the male's going to be a lot more distinctive and consequently easier to identify than female. Most female ducks are typically brown with some subtle differences, so they're not going to be as much fun to look at or to identify. With most birds, the sexes are going to be, as far as size, are going to be pretty identical as far as male and female. With the immatures, typically are not going to be as distinctive whether they're a male or female until they get to be an adult. But those are all great. That's a great question. And again, it's like anything. It's just going to take some practice and doing it more often and taking notes and referring to your field guide or your app, or ideally with your group. That's going to help you just learn those different differences.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is from Sungji. Sungji, do you mind unmuting and asking your questions?
Hi, David. Thank you so much for your time and for making it easy and accessible for us beginner birders. And I was curious to know that if you remember back in the day when you were first getting into birding, do you remember the first bird that really sparked your interest? And then my follow-up question to that would be, what's your favorite bird now?
Okay, well, I'll respond to that second question because I get it fairly often, and I don't necessarily. There are about 700 to 800 different species of birds in North America, and to just pick one out for me is extremely difficult, and I can't do it because I think one thing that has appealed to me about birds since I started is a tremendous variety. So my wife and I can enjoy the hummingbirds that are coming to our feeder, or we can enjoy a raptor like a hawk, because maybe people enjoy its powerful behaviors, or I'm blessed to get out on the ocean a lot doing whale watching trips, and maybe I see a bird like an albatross that lives for 50 or 60 years and can fly out over the ocean for days or weeks. So I enjoy the behavior and the environment of that bird. So not just, but I do, and there are certain birds that I do enjoy, and owls particularly. And so as far as your first question, probably one of the first birds that I did get really excited about was a great horned owl. off in a tree that I got a very good view of, and I know that's the case for a lot of people that I take out, and they've seen other birds, but getting to see an owl, owls have eyes that are facing forward as opposed to most birds have eyes on the sides of their head. So having eyes that face forward like ours do gives owls a good advantage in having tremendous binocular vision. So that gives them a human-like feeling, which I know a lot of people respond to, and a lot of people enjoy seeing owls. I'm not in the minority that way. Sure. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. And then let's see. A question from Sudesh. Sudesh, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Hi, it's a really interesting talk. I should say, a newbie birder. I've of course seen birds all my life around, but never took an interest in them. And going back to the last question about a spark bird, I always thought peacock was my spark bird because it was big, and
Sure.
obviously you can appreciate its amazing feathers. But then, as you know, as I grow older, and then watching hummingbirds with the binoculars, then oh gosh, this was my spark bird, and now every bird I see is a spark bird for me.
Great. This is
So,
great. Yeah.
so I mean, it's just amazing that I'm over 60, but I've got such a great interest in birds now as opposed to all these years. But I think it's never too late. Anyway, my question was, do you have any tips about using Merlin app or the eBird app?
The app I use a certain amount is called iBird. And so iBird can be, in that sense, it's just like having a book, a field guide, in that it can show you the photograph of the bird, the range map, can show you its sound, or to play the sound, some general information, behavior. But Sibley is very good, the Peterson app, and that jogs my memory that I would be remiss in not mentioning Merlin, which is a great app that a lot of people have been using more recently because that has a tremendous sound capability. And with Merlin, you can hold your phone out, and while you're hearing a bird or several birds, it will actually show you on the screen what that particular bird is that you're hearing. So they're not going to need me as naturalist anymore in a few years. It's great. They'll have the name of the bird right there, its behavior, its information. But the technology, if you told us 10 years ago that there's going to be an app where it's going to give you the name of the bird that's singing, we'd say, wow, that's pretty amazing. And I'm fortunate enough to travel. I was in England 6 weeks ago, and Costa Rica back in the beginning part of the year. And that Merlin, you can just download that feature for where you happen to be. So yeah, here we are in California, but if you're traveling, if you're lucky enough to go to India, let's say, there's a whole suite of birds there where you can download that part for Merlin, and you can use that app to really help you see. It's not necessarily that you're going to see that bird that you're hearing right at the time, but by certainly knowing the identity of it, name of it, that's going to give you a big advantage. So certainly, if people don't own and use Merlin already, I want everybody to go out. I should be there, sell them out of the trunk of my car or something. But no, it's a tremendous app, and take advantage of that technology. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat that there's some call outs to some of the resources that are online to other ones that exist. So thanks for sending those in the chat. And I'll also do a roundup of some of our Bay Nature content that's online that features a lot of birding information, and send that out in an email to everybody. But I also got a question over DM that was somewhat similar to your question, Sungji, about top birds. But David, if you have, is there a list of like 3 or 5 Bay Area birds that you would just recommend everyone look for or see in their life?
Well, I'd probably be remiss in, here we are in almost early October. It's somewhat the peak for raptor migration. And again, I don't know too many beginners that tell me I'd really want to go out and see some really exciting sparrows, maybe small brown birds that aren't that easy to identify. They're not particularly sexy, or maybe that's not a bird that beginners are initially going to seek out. But a red-tailed hawk or a golden eagle or a peregrine falcon, now those are pretty exciting. It's just like anything after a while. As a kid, I was interested in cars, and the 1964 Corvette was a much bigger deal to get a look at than a pickup truck or a Buick. So it's kind of the same thing with birds or other wildlife. We're going to place certain value judgment on things that are more colorful or powerful or fast or any of these different values. So yeah, there's a place called Hawk Hill, which is in the southern part of Marin County. If you go to the north end of the Golden Gate Bridge and then follow the signs up to the highest point there, the birds of prey that are migrating, things like hawks or falcons, take advantage of warm air rising off the ground. So in that sense, they're not flying over water. They're not flying that much over San Francisco Bay or the ocean. So they funnel down to that point, and typically late the last 10 days of September, getting into the early part of October can be a real peak time for raptor migration in that spot. Don't go when it's foggy because there won't be much happening, but there's some good sunshine. And they're often, or almost every day, though, this time of year, there will be volunteers up there, and they're usually pretty friendly and helpful. And they're going to tell you how to perhaps separate some of those distinctive challenging species, like how to separate the Cooper's hawk from the sharp-shinned hawk and other challenging identification issues. So Hawk Hill, any place with shorebirds, was the question about individual birds or birding sites. So I guess obviously they're tied together. But this is certainly shorebirds. This is the time of year where we probably have some of our greatest variety, although even in the wintertime, we kind of have a great variety of bird species. We have activity called a Christmas bird count, typically from mid-December to early January, and there are dozens of Christmas bird counts throughout the Bay Area, one down in San Jose or Oakland, San Francisco, Point Reyes, South Marin area, and beginners can take part in that activity. We were all beginners at some point, so the birds that are migrating along the coast, seabirds, and for a lot of people, it's not so much what birds they're seeing, but that they love being in a particular spot. Maybe it's Limmentor Beach at Point Reyes, or maybe it's Half Moon Bay, or if people haven't walked the roadway there at Montera Mountain, I'm drawing a blank with the name where Highway 1 used to be right on the corner there. And, it's a spectacular spot for peregrine falcons nesting there and whales offshore. And again, we're just blessed in any direction you go. We fantastic parks and resources that are available to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think all great recommendations, and maybe time for one last question. And I think I'll combine, Peter, your question with another question of mine and Peter was asking, what additional items do you think might be helpful to have or use, like harness straps, lens cleaner, etc. And I think to fit that into a larger question is like, what are things people should do to prepare for a birding outing? And then second part, what would your ideal birding outing look like? Yeah.
Myself as a guide and a teacher, the ideal outing would be one where the weather cooperates and the participants are seeing a good variety, getting good views and seeing a good variety of birds, and it makes them happy and excited with what they're doing, excited that they are going to want to continue to do it another time or often. As far as preparation, certainly knowing the birds that one might expect to see in a particular habitat you're going to. If you're going to Albany marshes there in the East Bay, you're probably going to be seeing some shorebirds or some waterfowl rather than, you're probably not going to be seeing an acorn woodpecker, which you would see back on the East Bay ridges somewhere. So I'm doing a little bit of homework, and as I mentioned, eBird is an amazing resource available to anybody. You could look at various hotspots. I can almost guarantee where anybody goes in the Bay Area to look at birds, that's going to be an eBird hotspot. So by looking at that and seeing what birds have been seen recently, and they might see, you could see a list of 3 or 4 species of grebes. Well, you might say, well, I know what the pie-billed grebe looks like, but I don't know what the eared grebe looks like. So you could do a little homework, look through your field guide or your app and get some idea about what these different birds are going to look like to give you some preparation and some feeling before just going there and being called. Again, I'm fortunate enough to travel a certain amount. We were in Costa Rica earlier this year. So I did a little bit of homework. So I had some idea of what different species I was going to see in different areas. And it's the same thing here in the Bay Area and other parts of California for sure. Great question. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that we can wrap up there. Yeah, thank you so much, David, for your time and for sharing your expertise and for making that birding guide for everyone. It's been really fun to hear everyone's questions and to hear all of your responses.
Yeah. Let's say I think I've got probably my website on that handout, and somewhere it's probably got a email address or even phone number. So if anybody has any other questions or wants to get out on a field trip or an organized tour locally or somewhere more distant, would love to see you folks. I know I do some field trips for Bay Nature over the years, and be great to see you folks out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and everyone who's listening, if you'd like free and discounted access to these events, please consider joining as a Bay Nature member, and you'll get to see more awesome naturalists like David and learn more about the nature here in the Bay Area. So thank you so much. Everyone, if we can maybe unmute and thank David on 3, I think that'd be really fun. So if we all unmute, I'll count us off. 1, 2, 3.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, David.
Thank you.
Leah, we should have asked them maybe to make a bird call or something.
Oh, yeah.
You could practice
Oh,
Yeah.
bird sounds. Right.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy fall migration and everything else. Look forward to seeing any of you folks out there. Yeah.
See you all. Take care.
Bye.